Hi guys, and welcome to part 3 of the Simple Backgrounds class. I'm going to be using the Friends Stamp and Die set by Honeybee Stamps for my focal image on all of my cards. So for this first one, we're going to be doing some embossing with our dies. So I have a set of dies here, and I believe these are by Gina Marie Designs. They're the wonky stitched rectangle dies. And I'm just going to layer them onto my card panel. They kind of fit pretty easily. There's a little bit of a gap between them, but not much. Once I have them lined up, I'm going to use 2 pieces of Post-it note tape just so that they stay in place when running it through my Gemini. And then I'm going to run this through with the embossing mat. And you'll just have to check the directions on whatever embossing machine that you use. And then I can carefully remove them. I'm keeping the Post-it note tape in place, and you can see that we have a nice dry embossed image onto our card panel. Now, because these are still kind of lined up, I'm going to take another card panel and I'm going to run it through my die cut machine just like normal. And I'm going to die cut each one of these little frames. That way I can adhere these down to a card panel, and I still kind of sort of have the same design, but I have a little bit of separation between each one of the pieces, and it really gives a really nice design. Now you can use different colors for this. You can pop different layers up and give it all kinds of designs. Just use your imagination. We're just keeping things simple just to kind of show you the different ways that you can create a very quick and simple background for either a sentiment or a focal image. Now I'm using wet glue as always because it's easier to line up. I have a couple of seconds to shift things around if needed. And that is it. Here's a quick comparison of the two. It just adds a little bit extra from the embossing. Next, we're going to take some heart dies, and I just took some heart dies from my stash. I have no idea what brand this is, and I cut out several of them from 3 different colors of cardstock. I'm going to take my card panel here, and I'm just going to line these up. I'm not sticking anything down right now because, quite honestly, I did have to kind of play around with the placement a lot. You would think that it would be really nice and easy, but what I was trying to do is I was trying not to pick or put 2 of the same color directly next to each other, or 2 of the same size right next to each other. And being I used 3 different sizes and 3 different colors, it was pretty much impossible. It was impossible. So I played around with this for way too long and decided that there was just no way around it. So it is what it is. But I like to kind of place everything down before sticking it down and making it permanent, just to make sure that the placement is going to be right and I'm going to have enough space in between each image. That's the main thing, is you just need to have about an equal amount of space. So once I am happy with the placement, I am going to go ahead and stick this down with my Tombow Mono Multi Glue, sticking down one at a time. That way I don't lose that placement that I worked so very hard at. And you can see that I have some images kind of right on the edge of the card panel. Don't worry, we're going to cut this down later. Now you can leave it just like this as your background. You can leave it just like this. But to add even something extra, you'll want to wait for your glue to dry. I'm going to use an embossing folder. This is just a polka dot embossing folder that was my very first one. It came with my Cuttlebug, which was my very first die cutting machine many years ago, and ran that through my Gemini. And you can see that not only do we have the embossed pattern, but it almost looks like a piece of pattern paper because those little individual dies are really stuck down. So now we're going to turn everything into cards. And as always, we are going to keep these very simple. Taking this dry emboss panel here that we use the dies for, and I'm just going to trim a tiny bit off of each side. And being we center this, you want to make sure that you're taking an equal amount off of all 4 sides so that the pattern is still centered. Took a piece of black cardstock. As always, you guys know me by now, just a little bit larger than my card panel, but just a little bit smaller than the card base itself. That way this will really pop off the page, and it is white on white. You can use colored cardstock, but I just kept everything white. So adding that little pop of black in the background really makes everything stand out. For the dies, I am just using the word and the smallest shadow. The die set comes with 2 shadows. I cut the word from white cardstock and the shadow from black cardstock, And don't forget about the little dot to the eye. I always tend to lose that and end up having to die cut everything because I lose that little dot to the eye. So be careful when you're running it through your die cut machine that you pay attention to where that little dot of the eye went. So once that was stuck down, I used my Tombow Mono Multi Glue once again and stuck that right there in the center. That's it. I didn't do anything else to this card. So moving on to the next panel, and this is the one that we use the same die set to cut out the frames of this. I am just going to stamp my sentiment. That's it. Not going to do anything special. It's already glued down to a card base. When we glued these frames together, I glued it right on my card base, so there's really no way of adding a mat to it at this point, which I'm fine with. So I'm going to take 2 of the sentiments from the Friends stamp set, and I typically just use my grid mat here to make sure that they're lined up. You can use a MISTI or a stamp positioning tool, but usually for my sentiments, I never do. I just grab an acrylic block, went ahead and stamped that right there in the center with VersaFine Onyx Black ink, which remember is a fast drying pigment ink, but gives you a really good impression for sentiments. Finished off with a few of the enamel accents drops. They're kind of like Nuvo drops, but they're just a little bit thinner, just to kind of bring out the black a little bit more, being the only black I have here is the sentiment. So just added those, a few on the top, a few on the bottom, just to kind of bring that out, and that's it for that one. Moving on to the third and final one. This is the die cut pieces and dry embossing, and I'm going to cut this down like I said before, so I'm not really too concerned about the hearts kind of hanging off the edge. It will make it look as if it's more of a seamless pattern if you do have some hanging off the edge, kind of like we're creating a stamped background, except we're creating a background with all dies. So I also cut a piece of the darkest pink cardstock, again just a little bit larger than the panel and a little bit smaller than the card base. That way I have a little bit of a frame there, and this will really make it pop off the page. Like always, instead of black, I'm just using the pink. So be careful when you're gluing down a dry embossed panel, because you have to get into all those little indentations, I guess. So it may not stick quite as fast as it normally does if it's just a flat piece of paper. So just keep that in mind if you're using wet glue. For my sentiment, I'm using that same die set, and I cut the word out of the white cardstock and the shadow out of that same dark pink cardstock that we used for our mat. And before I'm adding this, I'm going to add just a little bit something to these hearts. So I'm grabbing my Nuvo Aqua Shimmer Pen, and I'm just going to add some sparkle to all of these hearts. Now they are dry embossed, so they do have some raised areas, so you may have to go over them several times to really get that sparkle in all the nooks and crannies. But once I was able to do that, I just went ahead and added my sentiment, again with that with the Tombow Mono Multi Glue. Again, make sure that you add a little bit of extra pressure, or not extra pressure, but extended pressure, because we have to get into all of those little grooves. So here's a quick look at all of the 3 cards that we created today, and I look forward to seeing you in part 4 of the Simple Backgrounds class. Bye, guys.